Welcome back into the tactics room, and this is one of those results that looks utterly routine when you glance at the scoreline the morning after. But the 90 minutes themselves told a slightly more awkward story than the 3-0 record that it suggests. Morocco have gone through to the quarterfinals for the second World Cup running, and the Atlas Lions have fully deserved it. And they have stretched their unbeaten run out of 34 matches now. And they did it without ever really being at their fluent best. Canada, the co-hosts, the team that had already written more history in one tournament than they had managed in their entire footballing existence, ran into a side that simply did not panic, waited for the game to come to them, and then punished every mistake with the kind of clinical edge that separates the semi-finalist of 2022 from a nation still learning how to avoid these knockout heartbreaks. So what we'll do is that we'll walk across in this episode through how the shape of the game actually unfolded. Because if you only saw the goals, you would assume Morocco battered them, and that was not the case at all. This was the first half where Canada were the braver team, and the second half where Morocco flicked a switch on that Canada could not find the answer to. Morocco set up in their familiar 4-2-3-1 with Hakimi and Mazraoui as the two fullbacks who were always going to be the width in the side. A double pivot of Ounahi and Bouadi sitting in front of the back four. And then the creative trio of Brahim, Díaz, Ounahi and El Khanous floating behind Saibari as the lone striker. The whole design of the team is built around getting the pivot to circulate the ball quickly and then releasing the front four into the spaces that a committed opponent leaves behind. And that becomes very relevant to how the goals arrive later on. Jesse Marsh, the Canada manager, went with a fairly disciplined 4-4-2, asking them to defend in a mid-block, keep the two banks compact, and then get out on the counter through the pace of David and Oluwaseyi, with Buchanan carrying from the left. It was a sensible plan. It was well drilled, and for the opening period, it worked because Canada were happy to concede the ball, sit in that block, and back themselves to spring forward whenever they turned it over. The problem, and we will come to it, is that a plan built on staying compact and countering only holds up for as long as you keep the game goalless. And the moment the first one goes in, the whole structure has to change. And that is when Morocco are at their most dangerous. If you look at the momentum of the match, the opening 45 belonged to Canada absolutely. And it was Bono who was the busier of the two goalkeepers. Canada were pressing the triggers well. They were getting up to the Morocco back line when the pivot took a heavy touch. And they were forcing the Atlas Lions to go a bit longer than they would have liked. It was scrappy. It was full of duels. And the referee was searching for his pocket constantly. There were 8 yellow cards in the game, which tells you how much this was a contest of second balls and broken play rather than clean flowing football. And then Morocco lost Saibari to injury after only 22 minutes. Which was a real blow because he is one of those who holds the ball up and gives that front line its reference point. For a while, it disrupted them because without a natural focal point, their build-up got a bit loose and Canada grew into it even more. But here is the thing that a good tournament side does, and Morocco did it every time. They took that halftime whistle at 0-0, went in, did a reset, and they came out with a completely different tempo in the second half. The adjustment was not some dramatic change of formation. It was more about intent and speed. In the first half, Morocco were circulating the ball sideways and waiting for a picture to open up that never really came against a compact block. After the break, they started attacking the transition moments much more directly. They were looking to release the wide players and the runners from deep the instant they won it back. And they trusted Ounahi to arrive from that number 10 area into the edge of the box rather than getting involved in the slow build-up. Once they committed to going vertical, the moment the ball turned over, Canada's block, which relied on everyone being set and compact, kept getting caught halfway between pressing and dropping. And that is the exact gap Morocco wanted to attack. The first goal is a lovely piece of design, and it is exactly the kind of thing you rehearse on the training ground. Morocco had a free kick in a wide area on the right, the sort of situation where everybody in the box is expecting the cross to be whipped in. And instead, Hakimi disguised it completely and rolled a low pass out towards the edge of the area where Ounahi was waiting. Because the whole Canada defense had loaded up to attack a cross that never came, nobody stepped out to close Ounahi down. And he took his touch and curled it beautifully into the bottom right-hand corner with Creepew nowhere near it. That is a set-piece routine that works precisely because it plays on the opponent's expectation, and it broke the deadlock in a game that had been crying out for one moment of quality. The second goal was pure transition, and it is a goal that really tells you what Morocco had become in that second half. They won the ball back in a central area. Brahim Díaz picked it up and drove straight through the middle of the pitch at a Canada side that was now having to commit numbers forward because they were chasing the game, and he slid Ounahi in behind the last line with a perfectly weighted pass. Ounahi took it in his stride and finished with the same composure he showed for the first, and at that point, the tie was effectively done. This is the flip side of Jesse Marsh's plan. Once Canada had come out of their block and went looking for the equalizer, they left exactly the sort of space between their backline and midfield that their team as good in transition as Morocco will carve open every single time. And that's happened when they scored the third, which was almost a formality, at the stoppage time counter with a slightly flattering gloss on the final margin. Canada were throwing bodies forward in those closing minutes, which is understandable, and Morocco simply broke into the acres of space that were left and worked it to Rahimi, who finished it off past Creepew to make it 3. It is worth noting that all 3 of Morocco's goals came from just 3 of the 4 shots they had on target across the entire 90 minutes, which is about as clinical as it gets. And it underlines the gulf in ruthlessness between the two sides on the night. If you map where Morocco actually hurt Canada, it was overwhelmingly down their right and through the connection between Hakimi, Brahim Díaz and Ounahi. Hakimi was the highest and widest of that group, giving them the width and the overlap. Díaz drifted inside into the half space to combine and to carry in transition, and Ounahi was the one arriving late into the box to finish. The double pivot of El Ayanoui and Boadi did the unglamorous work of screening in front of the back four and recycling position, and crucially, they gave Morocco a stable rest defense so that every time Canada did turn it over and try to break, there were bodies already positioned to snuff it out and start the counter going the other way. That balance between having numbers to attack the transition and numbers to protect against it is what made Morocco look so controlled, even on a night when they were not creating a huge volume of chances. For Canada, there is genuinely no shame in this result. And I do not want to manner of the second half to overshadow what has been a landmark tournament for them. They reached the knockout rounds for the first time. They got their first ever World Cup win. They came through the round of 32 and they went toe-to-toe with the 2022 semi-finalist for an hour on their home soil. The lesson from tonight, and it is the same lesson every emerging side eventually has to learn, is that at this level, a low block and a counter is a plan that only survives while the game is level. And you need a second layer to your attack for the moment you are forced to chase. Their finishing let them down in that first half when they were on top. And against a side this efficient, You simply cannot pass up the good spells because you will only get so many of them. So Morocco marches on, and you'd have to say that they're quietly turning into one of the sides nobody wants to draw. They're not blowing teams away. They're not racking up 5 and 6 goals, but they're defensively miserly. They're lethal in transition. And they have that tournament team quality of finding a way to win a match that is not really going their way. That unbeaten run stretching to 34 now is not a fluke. It is built on a very clear idea of who they are and how they win. And if they keep taking 3 of their 4 chances every night, when they're going to be a serious problem for whoever comes next in the quarterfinal, most likely that is going to be France. For now, though, the Atlas Lions are into the last 8 and the co-hosts are out. This is the tactics rooms for today. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.